Every time she's produced a show on Broadway, she put up her own apartment as collateral. Then she produced a little show called Hairspray, and the apartment is safe. Welcome to Women in Theater. I'm Linda Weiner, theater critic of Newsday. And our guest is Margo Lion, one of the most successful independent producers in a world dominated by corporations, Broadway landlords, and, yes, men. So, this is a daredevil sport, no?
Yes.
I mean, an extreme sport.
Yes, that's a very well put description of being a producer. I've not heard that before, but I think that's absolutely on point.
Thank you, goodbye.
Yes, right. In fact, if I can diverge for a second.
Please.
When I was in the not-for-profit theater, which I was in for about 4 or 5 years, which I loved because I found it very rewarding to work with the artists and being able to not consider whether something was going to be appropriate for 1,000 people or 1,500 people, but could be appropriate for 99. But there was none of that wonderful danger that accompanies commercial producing, and I guess I thrive on that. So I was happy to make the change.
What was the first show that you did that was in commercial?
The first show
theoretically commercial.
Yeah, theoretically commercial, right, was a show called How I Got That Story, which was in 1982.
Bob Gunton
and Donnie Scardino, West Side Arts, and it started a long career of a lot of awards and no recoupment. So, but it was a wonderful piece, and I was happy to do it.
And from then, how do you pick? How do you look at something and say, okay, this is one that's worth hawking the home for again?
Well, you know, Linda, I just do things I want to see myself, that I'm interested in. I can't try and second guess the audience. I don't know what they're going to like, and and anyway, it takes too long to get these things up.
And there's no way to second guess the critics. I can't.
No, I've given up with the critics.
Sorry.
You never know.
Yeah.
And so I just try and find projects that I feel have some sort of personal resonance for me, that I'm going to be, if it's a musical, that I'm taking from an idea straight through, that it's something I'm going to be willing to work on for many years. If it's a play, it's something that has special meaning to me for one reason or another, and I just do my job and as well as I can and hope it's going to work.
There aren't many of you, right? I mean, you're a kind of endangered species, the independent producer.
Well, that's the sort of word on
changing?
the street. I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of independent producers now, and there are a lot of young independent producers, which I find particularly good for the business. And so I think that that's a sort of notion that came out several years ago when corporations, Disney and what is now Live Nation, which was Clear Channel, which was Pace,
which was
yes, right, which was and Live End was another one.
Yeah.
And I think there was some sense that corporations were going to take over Broadway. But, you know, Broadway is theater is very intractable. It really is a business, sort of business art commercial field that is resistant to a kind of cookie cutter approach. And I don't know why this is.
Well, it's still a handmade. It's handmade. There's a push cart mentality that's
there is, but I mean,
best.
There's something about the spirit of what's on stage live that I feel magically needs the kind of impulse of an individual behind it, because it just doesn't work to try and take something and just throw it up or put it up. Even if you work very, very hard. If you look even at something like Disney, Tom Schumacher is a very, very passionate producer, and he was in the theater before he started working for Disney.
He was in Chicago.
Yes, he was in Los Angeles, and I think that it just takes that kind of passion. I always say it's passion and persistence and patience. Those are the things that are the sine qua nons for producers, I think.
Now, I may be wrong, but I think that there are different kinds of independent producers, and that possibly you are a different kind of independent producer on different shows. With Hairspray, it was your baby.
Right.
With some of them,
I just am part of a team that raises money and markets and promotes them, oversees them. I mean, there are three kinds of producing. One is the you're sitting in your room and you have an idea. That there are very few people who do that. That's what I do because that's the thing I love the most that I do, because it enables me to be most creative. And since I really can't do anything that is recognizably creative, I don't
Raising
write.
money is very
well, I
creative,
don't write,
right?
I don't direct, I don't design, and I don't act. Although I wanted to be an actress. This allows me to have real input particularly in the choice of the original material, the subject matter, and then in the choosing of the creative team. And I've done that now 4 times.
Okay, Hairspray, yes. Which other ones?
First one I ever did was Jelly's Last Jam, which was an idea I had actually when I was working in not-for-profit in the late 70s, and then I took with me, and it took 11 years to find the right team and get it up. And
George Wolfe and
it was George Wolfe's debut on Broadway, and it was a thrilling, very, very challenging process, but it is really dear to my heart. Then after the second one I did was Triumph of Love.
Such a heartbreak. What a sweetheart of a show.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that.
I love Triumph of Love.
It was a great show, and I'm determined to get it back.
Good.
Maybe off Broadway this time. It's 7 people. That came as a result of working with Michael Mayer on the road company of Angels in America. And I happened to go down and see his version of the play of Triumph of Love, and I said, gee, this would be a great musical, and on a plane we decided to do it, and so I did that. Then Hairspray came about because I wanted to do a musical about young people that had a lot of dance. This was, as a result of the 80s when there hadn't been a lot of dance, and I was into doing something new.
Because the British musicals didn't dance.
They didn't dance.
They just decorated.
Right, and I was looking around for something, and actually the way that happened is I wanted to do Clueless. This was before people were adapting movies. I just want to say that, and we can address that later. But and I went to Scott Rudin, who is a colleague, and I said, he had produced the movie Clueless, and I said, I'd like to do this as a musical. And he said, no, you don't want to do that. You want to do Hairspray. And I said, no, I don't want to do Hairspray. I didn't like the movie, and I'm not going to do it.
It's John Waters' movie from 1980.
1988.
Okay.
And so 3 years later or something, I actually was it was after Triumph, and I went through a huge down period, thinking, I don't know if I ever want to do this again.
I was depressed. I can imagine that you were depressed.
Just broke my heart.
Yeah.
And but I was home. I had a flu or cold or something, and I had a bunch of movies there, one of which is Hairspray, and I put it on, and I thought, oh my God, I do want to do this. I must have gotten more sophisticated, I thought, in the last 10 years. So, I did that, and then the last one I did, which also was not successful, but was an effort I did with New Line, which was The Wedding Singer, and that was something they came to me about after Hairspray opened. They wanted to take advantage of their catalog, and I always knew it was a challenge because it's, an Adam Sandler movie, and it's the audience for Wedding Singer skews a little younger, and
it had its own soundtrack of original music.
It did. You mean the movie?
Yeah,
did.
the movie
Yes,
did.
yes. Well, so did Hairspray, but the original
That's
movie.
true.
But so now I'm thinking about what the next thing is. I'm excited about a possibility of something of a Latino musical, which I've been looking for about 7 years, and I'm coming together with a group who I can't really mention right now, and we're looking at doing something together. And but I try and do material that has, when I'm initiating it, that has some type of contemporary resonance. Now, it might seem that something like Triumph of Love didn't have that, but actually it did, because it was a woman who was trying to, come to terms with being very powerful, but also falling in love with, a guy, and how to balance all of that. And also stylistically, I think it was very contemporary, as was Hairspray.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have some kind of contemporary resonance, something quasi-political, social, because that's what I'm interested in outside of the theater, politics. And in the case of Hairspray, I think it really does celebrate the best of sort of American values. And in the case of Jelly's Last Jam, I think it was dealing with a social issue that is very complicated in this country, that of race and the
This was a biography
color.
of Jelly
Roll
Roll,
right. Mm-hmm. And even in The Wedding Singer, I said when I started, I can't do this project unless there's a big number about the greed of the 80s. And so that's how they opened Act Two. So that's one kind of producing, and that is, as I said, most rewarding. And the other kind is an example, or a second kind is like Angels in America, where the show had been put up and in fact heralded, certainly by the Times critic, in London. And it came to, as you remember, it came to the Mark Taper, and all of us, like lemmings, went out and saw it, and you too. And the feeling was that it needed a new production, a new director, a new point of view. And at that point, I had just finished mounting. It was a year after Jelly, and there was a kind of, contest, if you will, because everybody wanted Angels in America. All the theater owners wanted it, and every producer wanted to be involved with it. And it was sort of who was going to come up with the right idea for the new director. And not because I was particularly gifted or insightful, but because I had just finished working with George. I said, well, what about George Wolfe? And of course, Tony loved that idea, and that started a partnership that I have to say it's one of the most rewarding results of my career, and putting those two guys together. And so that's another kind.
Yeah.
And then the last kind is what I'm doing with Radio Golf. It's a production that exists.
This is August Wilson's last play. Yeah.
And because of my great affection for August and my admiration for his work,
and you were involved in Seven Guitars also.
I was involved with Seven Guitars, and actually at one point, this is amazing to recount, but August was a writer for what later became Jelly's Last Jam.
Wow. So you said the second thing about that you look for is that it should be political, and it's hard for me not to look at I'm looking at your eyes, but there's a part of me is going Barack Obama, Barack Obama. This show may be shown in reruns long after we know about the results of the election. In fact, we're only in February of
we're a year from the first primaries.
Right. But you also worked with Robert Kennedy.
I did.
What is this political thing?
Well, I mean, I never thought I'd end up in theater. That wasn't even on my radar. And I grew up in Baltimore. That isn't why I chose Hairspray, but it's just an ironic point, right? And around the dinner table, we would always discuss politics. And of course, of the age where in the 60s, a lot of things were going on that were exciting. I was coming of age, and how could you not be turned on by John Kennedy and then later Robert, Bobby? And when Bobby was running, I was a young person, and I was an intern working in the office, putting together programs for inner city kids to go to various cultural events. So there we are, right? I was working with a lot of theater producers, and he was a truly inspiring man. But when he was shot, I just said, this is it. I don't want to do this anymore. There were 3 shootings in the 60s, and that was sort of it. And but I love this country. I love what I believe we all think it stands for on our good days. And I think we're in very deep trouble right now, and I'm looking for someone who I think has judgment and vision and the ability really to bring people together, and I think that's Barack. I mean, he's a remarkable man.
I can say it's the first Obama button I've seen, so that's how fresh we are onto his announcing.
Right.
But you did get into the theater, and this happened because you married somebody who was...
Yes, it happened. Yeah. Right, it happened because I got married. Well, it happened because my former husband was an aspiring playwright, never quite made it, but as fate would have it, I went on to it, and he moved down to Guatemala. But we were out at the University of Iowa together. He was in the writer's workshop there, and I just sort of hung out with him with the playwrights and directors, and I thought, gosh, it's really fun being around these people. I've always loved being around creative people and writers and directors in particular. And so I thought, having taught school for 5 years before that, after I was in the political,
what grade?
Little kids, 6, 7.
That's so hard.
Yeah. Well, it was good. It was very good experience for working in the theater. So I really love the community, and I love the process. I think most people in the theater will say that to you, that it really is the getting there that's the fun. And, it's great standing in the back and hearing people applaud your work and being in the audience, but really it is the process that is so rewarding and just fun, And so anyway, I thought, well, this will be fun. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to become a producer. It seemed the good thing was it was a profession you didn't have to really have any experience for, and you just could go out and learn it. And the only person I knew who could help me was my cousin Martha Clark, who was at that time.
Was she still with Pilobolus?
She had left Pilobolus, and she was working, just beginning as a director, choreographer with Lynn Austin, who ran a little theater company, not-for-profit. And I said to Martha, can you put me in touch with her? And she said yes. And then I worked with Lynn for 4 or 5 years, and that was wonderful, because Lynn had been
called the
Music Theater Group / Lennox Art Center.
Yes.
And Lynn had come, actually, she had been working Broadway for 15 years with Roger Stevens, so she knew all about that, but she decided to start her own group where she could be more maybe adventurous. And I completely understand that impulse now. I'm about at the age Lynn was when I met her. And and she was very artist-centered. Her instinct was to choose artists that she really believed in and then give them an opportunity to do something that they dreamt of doing and hadn't maybe had an opportunity to do that before. And I think the first big success she had with that kind of point of view was with Tommy Tune, and she gave him the chance to direct the club, which I think was his first directorial experience. And so she was a wonderful person for me to learn from.
And did you really deliver news releases on your bicycle?
I did, on my bike with my son on the back, and I swept dressing rooms, and I raised money, and I did the whole thing, and it was a great experience. Learned to do budgets on the back of an envelope or on a yellow pad, which I still do. And her spirit was exactly a perfect fit for me. And so I feel it was very fortunate coming together for me.
Now, you've said that you think that you came into the theater for the same reason you think a lot of people do, looking for family. Your parents died in a plane crash?
My parents died when I was 18. I was in college, freshman year in college, and they were on a trip in Egypt, and there was a sandstorm and the plane blew up.
Whoa.
So it was bad. But, you know, at that age, you kind of are just in shock, so it's sort of taken a lifetime to absorb it. But
yeah. And so then you just, I don't mean to pry, but then you just went off and lived on your own, or did other people raise you?
I had a sister who's since passed away, but she was 4 years older, and when I went home for vacations from college, I would stay with her. But you know, at 18, you feel you're pretty old.
Yeah.
Even now, looking back, you know, I was just still a child. But, you know, and again, as events turned out, I probably wouldn't have had the career I've had if they had lived, and I hadn't had a little bit more flexibility than I wouldn't have had the flexibility that I've had now. And who knows what path I would have followed.
So you, this Jewish upper middle class girl living in Baltimore who went to a WASPy school,
right?
Right. And before all this happened, what did you think you were going to do with your life? Did you?
I thought I'd get married and have 3 children and live in Baltimore.
Oh.
I mean, my life has been an incredibly surprising series of events for me. I never expected this. I said to actually an old boyfriend about 2 weeks ago, I said, you know, I was never ambitious when I was young. I never had any ambition. I really thought I was just going to get married. And he said, what do you mean you had no ambition? He said, you've got to be kidding me. You had tons of ambition. I said, what are you talking about? I just wanted my husband to be successful. He said, yeah, well, that's where your ambition was. So, I feel very, very fortunate. It's just been an incredibly exciting journey. I hope it continues for a long time.
Why did you have a T-shirt that someone gave you a T-shirt during the production, I think, of Hairspray that said, if it's not broken, you're not...
Triumph of love. If it's not broken, you haven't looked hard enough.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid that's in Jack O'Brien in Hairspray. He coined me the pneumatic drill.
The pneumatic drill.
Yeah.
And then you're also called Miss Worst Case Scenario. I mean, you look like
I know.
I wouldn't have known that just from the appearance, no?
Well, I think, you know, I'm not going to go into deep psychology here, but I think I never quite believe that anything I'm going to do is going to be good enough, so I'm always sort of looking for where the holes are. And actually, I think it served me well because probably it drives the creative teams nuts, particularly the directors. But in the end, probably more times than not, a lot of things that I'm worried about are unnecessary worry about, because they actually know their problems, and some don't even end up being issues with the audience. But I think it's that kind of vigilance and determination to have the best that you can that has served me well as a producer.
How has Hairspray, the success of Hairspray, changed your life?
I think the success of Hairspray put something to rest. I think I don't need to prove myself anymore. I think before Hairspray, I was sort of a maverick producer who did things that were, I think as you said, when we were off camera, you know, were maybe more suited for, in people's minds, for not-for-profit. This put me, you know, full center in the commercial world. But I think it's relaxed something in me, and perhaps I don't feel as driven in a certain way to prove myself. It doesn't mean that I don't want everything I do to be really great, because I do. But I think it's certainly put that to rest. I think it's given me a kind of confidence in myself that maybe I didn't have before. It too was a complete surprise. I mean, the history of Hairspray is I thought I would do it down at New York Theater Workshop, and I thought maybe it would have a stock and amateur life. But I never thought of a John Waters movie as being this, you know, big juggernaut hit.
Are you involved in the movie that's coming out?
Only very peripherally. New Line was nice and gave me a credit.
Because the movies, traditionally, when the movie came out, it cannibalized the show. And then when Chicago came out, it changed all that, theoretically.
Yeah, well,
So are you worried?
No, because I'm not worried, and in some ways it's a bit of a disappointment culturally for me. I think what's happened is that the culture is so brand-oriented, and it could be a symptom of a lack of imagination in the culture, that it's sort of winded, if you will. And it just everybody wants to know what it is they're seeing before they see it. Now, there are cases where that certainly isn't true. I think Spring Awakening being one of them, a total surprise for the audience, and certainly for the commercial theater on the Broadway now. But I think the recycling of ideas just gives, or product in different incarnations, just gives the public a familiarity with the material that they seem to want. I mean, I'm not sure that's a good thing, but I don't think it's going to hurt Hairspray on Broadway. I don't think it would help, actually.
Do you think, I mean, after Wedding Singer, and then right after it, the High Fidelity, both pleasant, benign, you know, at another time might have had longer lives, but and certainly Wedding Singer wasn't a quick death.
No, we had a season.
You had a season.
Yeah.
But do you think that the adaptation of movies, particularly for musical comedies, is sort of hit a wall, or you think it just needs to be one more success and people forget?
I think that Rocco Landisman and I talk about this a lot.
Rocco Landisman, who's the head of Jude Jansen. Yes, okay.
Right. And we were up at Yale talking about this at his class last week, and I think what people commenting on the theater, critics and feature writers need to understand is that traditionally, musicals have been adapted from some story or other, whether it be from a play, from a short story, from a novel, whatever.
From Baedeking.
From Baedeking, right.
for Spring
and,
Awakening.
you know, there's a great quote that I teach down at NYU, the musical theater writers, and they have this notion that it's not original if it's based on anything. And I quote a lyricist who said, and I think it's absolutely to the point, that it's hard enough to write a musical. Choose something, a subject that you already is outlined, that there's a story for. And I think this is true. It doesn't mean that it's not original. I mean, you know, Carousel was original, Oklahoma was original, but they were both based on things. My Fair Lady, West Side Story, Sweeney Todd.
But Sunday in the Park with George.
No, but you could argue that the most successful shows have been, Chorus Line being an exception to that. But I don't think there's anything wrong in basing something on on a story, an underlying story or material. I think that right now the stories are in movies. You know, there aren't plays. You know, we don't have plays that can be adapted easily. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's in the way that they're reimagined, whether that's successful or not. I mean, it'll be interesting with Wedding Singer, which is going on tour next year, and which has actually higher name value than Hairspray. And we've gotten enormous interest from countries, you know, outside of America for Wedding Singer who don't even know Hairspray. So, you know, I think it's a very tricky thing. But I think that people have to make their judgment on the basis of what they see on stage, not the fact that it's based on something else.
Oh, we have very little time left, but if you could snap your fingers and change anything right now for the theater, or specifically for women in theater, can you think of one thing that you would change?
That it would be less expensive. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah.
And then we could take more chances.
Yeah. Yeah. Margo Lion, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for joining us. On behalf of the League of Professional Theater Women, I'm Linda Weiner, and this has been Women in Theater.
Great.